What's going on, everyone? It's Monday morning, and we still have Monday Night Football ahead of us. But regardless, I still wanted to come out with an early look at my top Week 12 waiver wire pickups. And I know playoffs are right around the corner, crunch time right now. So in response to that, I wanted to do a little bit of a longer list. So I've got my top 20 guys to go after, and let's get right into it. Starting off with the quarterback position, this might be a tough week to find that stud must-start guy off of waivers, but regardless, I've got a quick list of guys off of waivers that should be available hopefully and have very manageable matchups. So starting with Phillip Rivers versus the Cowboys this week, it's going to be Thanksgiving Day game, and Rivers coming off 251 yards, 2 touchdowns versus the Bills. That could have been more, but the defense just started dominating on the side of the Chargers, so that's why his day was kind of limited. But to me, this game versus the Cowboys has the perfect combination. Defensively, the Cowboys are weak, probably going to be without Sean Lee again, so that's a bonus for Phil Rivers in that offense. And on top of that, I think the Chargers are in that point in time where they're making a push for the playoffs in that weak AFC, so that's going to allow them to put their best foot forward, kind of lean on their offense, and put together as many points as possible. So for that reason, I like Phil Rivers this week. In order for the Chargers to go on a little bit of a streak, go ahead, if he's available, pick him up. Next, the guy that I want to mention is Marcus Mariota, because I've been seeing a lot of news about why you should be dropping him in fantasy leagues, things like that. But again, this week he has a favorable matchup versus the Colts. Now, he did come off of 306 yards, a touchdown passing and rushing, but 4 interceptions versus the Steelers. I will say, though, that Steelers secondary is legit, whereas the Colts don't have really that many pieces defensively. And the last time they played, the Titans were able to put it on the Colts. More of a rushing performance, but nonetheless, Titans should have success in this game. Now, to me, Marcus Mariota, he's always got that plus bonus as a rusher and as a passer. I think he'll be able to do a lot. And in order for them to stay in that wild card spot in the AFC again, I look for Mariota in that offense to have a nice performance versus the lonely Colts. The next guy on my list is Andy Dalton, and the reason why he's on this list is because of matchups, and that is, again, key because he will be facing the Cleveland Browns at home in Cincinnati, and Dalton is coming off only 154 yards passing, but 3 touchdowns, and this was versus a tough Denver defense who still has playmakers on that side of the football, especially in the secondary, so keep that in mind. And to me, I think there is some hopes in Cincinnati again that maybe they can make a late playoff push for that wild card spot. And again, matchup wise, defensively, you have to give the edge to the Bengals. They have all the guys. I look for a guy like AJ Green to have a big game, and Andy Dalton in response to also go off. So if you have Dalton off of waivers, maybe worth picking up if you are struggling at that position. The final guy on this list, and somewhat of a long shot and could raise some eyebrows, but I still like him, Brock Osweiler versus the Raiders. Now, Osweiler is coming off 254 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, but I will say this, there's 2 things that I like going for him. First of all, he's going up against the Raiders, whose defense has had issues from the start of the season, but the thing that really intrigues me here is that the Broncos just made a change with their offensive coordinator. So they're bringing in someone new, actually just upgrading their quarterback coach to offensive coordinator. So to me, that tells me that's going to be more of a focus on the quarterback through that offense. So look for Osweiler to maybe air it out more, see what happens there, and I think that can be a nice combination, and Osweiler can be in for a sneaky, nice game. Transitioning to the running back position, I want to start off with 2 guys on the Redskins in Perine and Byron Marshall. And the big reason here is obviously the Chris Thompson injury, broken fibula. So to me, someone has to take over that production. And on an offense that was relying heavily on Chris Thompson, that could mean big things for Perine, who came off 23 carries for 117 yards and a touchdown. Now, the big question is, which Perine will we see going forward? The one that had that great performance last week, or the one that's been struggling in weeks before? That'll be something interesting to keep an eye out on. But in a year where the running back position is so weak, I think you have to go ahead and add him if he is available. I know that's a big if, but nonetheless, if he is available, go ahead and put in a request for him. And on the flip side, Byron Marshall, that's going to be the next man up after Perine. Maybe he can take over a little bit more of that Chris Thompson role as a pass catcher as well. He is worth stashing as well in case Perine struggles going forward. Next, we have Alex Collins of the Ravens, and I know a lot of people thought, including myself, that with Danny Woodhead being reinserted into that offense, he would kind of take over the role as the lead guy, but it really does seem like Collins hung onto that role. He had 20 carries for 49 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and he didn't really come close to any of the other running backs in that category. On top of that, he still did have 4 receptions for 22 yards. Now, I do expect Danny Woodhead to become more involved in the offense as it progresses, but for now, in a situation where a lot of people might have been dropping one of these guys, whether it be Javorius Allen or Alex Collins, to get Danny Woodhead, if they're available on waivers, go ahead, try and pick them up. Continuing on, I want to talk Latavius Murray of the Vikings. Now, he is coming off a big performance, 15 carries, 95 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He might or might not be available in your leagues, but I will say I still believe when it's all said and done that Jerick McKinnon is the better running back. He's the better guy moving forward, and to me, Murray has the appeal in tougher defensive matchups, but when it's in friendly matchups, it really does look like McKinnon just shines, both receiving and in rushing the football. I will say, if I am a guy that can get Latavius Murray off waivers, what I would personally do is go ahead, pick him up, but instead of going with him for the rest of the season, I would try and capitalize off his big performance here and the one from the week before and try and trade high for him. Maybe some people are chasing points and are willing to give you something better in return. If you can, I say go for that and see what happens as a result. Next, I've got Devontae Booker of the Broncos, and he's coming off 14 carries for 44 yards and 5 receptions for 54 yards versus the Bengals. And to me, the reason that why I have him here, again, twofold. He is getting almost equal work to CJ Anderson, even though CJ did get the rushing touchdown when it was all said and done. Pretty much the same amount of carries. Booker actually had 1 more. But the main reason here that I like him is, again, the change with the offensive coordinator. It's somewhat of an unknown, but possibly we can see the Denver offense transforming more suitable to what Booker can bring to the table. So if there is any possibility of that happening, I say you have to go ahead, add Booker, and kind of take a flyer on him. And finally, I've got Alfred Blue, who's definitely a deeper waiver target than a lot of these guys on the Texans. And the main reason here is Foreman suffering that season-ending injury. He was the backup to Lamar Miller. And the reason I like Blue is because in previous year's end, when he's been in the mix with Miller, he's had sometimes even more success than Miller in that backfield. And to me, with Miller being such an inconsistent guy running the football, susceptible to little injuries, I would go ahead and add Alfred Blue, especially if you are a Lamar Miller owner. You never know what can happen, so I think he is worth a stash moving forward. Moving on to the wide receiver position, the first guy I want to start with is Cooper Kupp of the Rams. Now, he's coming off 6 receptions, 64 yards versus a tough Minnesota defense, and definitely a better performance when in terms of PPR. But regardless, the Rams this week have the Saints, and I think that should be a high-scoring affair on all fronts. For that reason, I like Kupp. He still has Robert Woods and Watkins to contend with, but I think he's a sneaky option that some guys tend to forget about. Definitely a higher chance that he'll still be available on waivers than a guy, like I said, Woods or Watkins. So go ahead, take a chance on him this week. Favorable matchup versus a high-scoring Saints team. Next, a guy in Kenny Stills who had one of the more impressive performances at the wide receiver position this week. 7 receptions for 180 yards and a touchdown. And of course, the big story with Stills was the fact that Matt Moore replaced Jake Cutler, who went into the quote-unquote concussion protocol. Now, we'll see what happens this week going up against the Patriots, the Dolphins are. And I will say a lot of the value with Stills comes with that connection with Matt Moore that he has. Definitely has had a lot more success with him than with Cutler. So I would elevate him if Matt Moore is declared the starter and kind of devalue him and not rank him as high up on your waiver wire priority at wide receiver. Cutler is able to play. And I will say, in a game where I expect the Patriots to put up a lot of points, The Dolphins should be airing it out, and if Matt Moore is there, expect for him to look at Kenny Stills. And finally, wrapping up my list of wide receivers to add, I actually have two guys on the Redskins in Josh Doctson and Jamison Crowder. Doctson just came off 4 receptions for 81 yards, and then Crowder 7 receptions for 72 yards. And now, I fully expect both these guys to get a nice bump with Chris Thompson out. Now, one of these guys, whether it's Doctson or Crowder, might or might not be available off waivers. So if either one is, I would say try and pick him up. The guy that I personally like more is Josh Doctson. He's looked more and more like that number 1 receiver. He's been getting targets. The thing that I do like about Crowder, at least, is that he is getting healthy. He had been dealing with some nicked up injuries and now looking more and more like he's healthy. I think he's more of a target guy in terms of PPR. So if you're in PPR, maybe go with him. Otherwise, I think Josh Doctson is the number 1 receiver on that offense. Pryor is nowhere to be found, so forget about him. To me, Doctson and Crowder are the 2 receivers that should be owned on a Washington offense that has been trending upwards with the recent production from Kirk Cousins. Now moving forward to the tight end position, first guy that I want to mention is Jesse James of the Steelers. He just finished his game last week, 5 receptions, 21 yards, and a touchdown versus the Titans. And I know that was a very high-scoring affair, and he's still behind, Antonio Brown, Juju, Le'Veon Bell. But still, look at the matchup this week. Steelers have the Green Bay Packers, and I think that's a similar matchup in terms of the potential that the Steelers have scoring-wise. To me, there's no reason why Jesse James can't have another touchdown performance where he goes for 4 receptions for 40 yards or something like that. I fully expect the defense to be able to help out the offense for the Steelers and be setting them up in favorable field position. So I look for them to convert those short fields into nice touchdowns, and I think Jesse James is a guy with nice upside for this week versus the Packers. And finally on the short list of tight ends, a guy that I think has been getting mentioned a lot recently, and if he is still available, Vernon Davis of the Redskins. Again, another Redskin on this list, but that's what happens when you lose a guy like Chris Thompson, who was such a big part in both the rushing and in the passing game. And on top of that, the Redskins are going up against the Giants, who struggle immensely versus the tight ends. Travis Kelce just had a huge game against them, and they gave up touchdowns to the tight end position like no other. In the majority of their games, they have done so. And with Jordan Reed, his status being all over the map, I think you have to roll with Vernon Davis of the Redskins, and he's been delivering some nice performances as of late. And like I said, very favorable matchup versus a Giants team defensively that struggles mightily against the tight end. And now finally, getting to the defenses, wouldn't be a true waiver wire video without these guys. And I actually think week 12 is a really nice week for streaming a bunch of defenses. And starting off with the Steelers on my list, they go up against the Green Bay Packers in Pittsburgh. And, we saw what the Green Bay Packers did versus the Baltimore Ravens this week. They struggled on all fronts, and multiple interceptions, fumbles, and on top of that, they got blanked. I think the Steelers defense can do the same, coming off their very own performance that was quite impressive versus the Titans. That secondary stepped up, and I think they can do the same. Limit Huntley as far as the big passes go, and then allow the pressure up front to get to him. So I fully expect the Steelers defense to be a very nice play this week. Continuing the trend with AFC North defenses, I've got the Baltimore Ravens, and if they're available, definitely scoop them up, because not only this week, but going forward, they have a very favorable playoff schedule. This week, they've got the Texans, and again, we saw what the Ravens did versus the Packers, and to me, there's no reason why they cannot duplicate, or at least give you half of that performance would still be very nice. That would equate to about 15 points for a defense. And versus the Texans, Tom Savage, I think he can be exploited. This game's in Baltimore, so that's another advantage for the Ravens, home field advantage. I think they can shut down, as long as they shut down DeAndre Hopkins, then they can put a lot of pressure on Savage and make this game a long one for him and that Houston offense. So if available, go ahead, add the Ravens defense, not only for this week, but also moving forward. Next, I want to talk Seattle Seahawks, and look, this has been a defense that's been all over the map this year, and for that reason, some owners might have gotten frustrated, dropped them, and honestly, I can't blame you if you have, because they keep losing pieces on that defense with Richard Sherman, now Chancellor, and to me, that really does not bode well for them long term. But the main thing here is this week they will have the 49ers, who in these divisional games usually struggle. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a very low scoring affair on the side of Seattle too, but again, that bodes well for the defense. These two teams know each other, so I expect it to be a hard-fought game, ugly game most likely, where the Seattle defense does just enough, and I could see them getting 10 points, 10 to 15 points, somewhere in that range, which would be a very nice performance for that defense that has a lot of question marks, especially in the secondary. Next, continuing with a defense that has been quite on the rise as of late, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles, and they might or might not be available for people in leagues that stream defenses. Maybe they didn't take a shot with them versus the Dallas Cowboys this week after they were coming off their bye, so if they're still available, go ahead, pick them up, because they have got the Chicago Bears, and again, this is going to come down to a team that is just better on all fronts than their opponents. The Eagles are going to jump out to a lead versus the Bears, and the Bears are going to be forced to pass the ball, and that is not their forte. I think the Eagles will be able to take advantage of that greatly. I think they'll be able to fluster Mitch Trubisky. This game is in Philly, and that Philly crowd is going to make it a long game for the Bears and Trubisky is what I predict. I expect several turnovers. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a pick six somewhere in there. So go ahead, if the Eagles are still available, definitely pick them up for this week. And finally, rounding off my top 5 defenses, I've got the Cincinnati Bengals going up against the Browns. And look, anytime you are playing the Browns as a defense, you have a favorable matchup. They are still the only winless team in the NFL. A lot of issues there. I know they got Corey Coleman back, but still, the Bengals haven't been playing also half bad defense. That's one of the reasons why they've been in somewhat close games, even in their losses. So I do think this is a good matchup. Again, two divisional teams that know each other, and I expect it to be, again, a hard-fought game, ugly game where maybe the Bengals distance themselves late, but in the meantime, I think they will get theirs in terms of sacks, in terms of maybe a turnover or two. So again, if available, go ahead, take a chance on the Bengals versus the Browns this week. So with that, we've come to a wrap of my top 20 waiver wire pickups for week 12. And feel free, let me know, what do you guys think? Do you agree with the names? Do you disagree? Are there some guys you would add that I don't have on there? If you have any questions whatsoever, go ahead, let me know in the comments section. I'll do my best to answer all of them. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.